Definitely a sidestep, and she definitely got crunched on that rock. Good morning, campers. We are only 290 meters from well number 11.
There's the well, right there.
Well number 11, or Goodwin Soak, as it's also known. Not much left of this sucker. It is, however, completely full of water, as you'd expect, because we're in a swamp. Interesting area here, this soak. At Goodwin Soak, the last of the meat was finished. Before Canning headed off to attain additional supplies, Trotman advised the men of the predicament they were in and said they could leave with Canning if they wished. He then asked for volunteers to help finish the wells while Canning was away. Many agreed to stay, with Gus Langheim saying, "If we're going to leave our carcasses in the desert, it's up to us to supply the water to the poor bastards who will come searching for us." The men worked like galley slaves completing the wells. Their rations had now shrunk to a small quantity of tea, flour, and sugar. When the last of the rations were issued, they had nothing to eat for 2 days. Reaching Winditch Springs, they rested and awaited Canning. Eventually, Bill Matheson turned up with some supplies, saying the stores were overdue in Wiluna due to the Teamster being bogged between Wiluna and Kew. The supplies he brought out were supplied by good-hearted townsfolk who, despite being short of supplies themselves, wished to help. In the meantime, Canning set off for Kew searching for the bogged Teamster. After locating the Teamster, he loaded the camels, returned to Wiluna, repaid the townsfolk before heading out to Trotman and the men at Winditch. Canning was exhausted after a round trip of 725 kilometers. When the unshaven and unkempt shabby party arrived in Wiluna on the 12th of March, they were cheered and welcomed by the townsfolk. Canning went to the post office and sent a wire to Harry King, the secretary of the mines department, saying, "Work completed, Canning." Incredible. We're not far east of well 11, and we're running parallel to June, but according to the map, it looks like we're going to dip over top of it before too long. So stay tuned for the action.
You're supposed to over-deliver and under-promise.
We'll sell you the whole seat, but you'll only need the edge. And here we go. Hang on to the edge of your seat.
Straight into the sun.
Sweet. We had a look on our map, and apparently White Lake is just over top of this sand ridge. So we're going to climb up there and see whether our map is truthful or not. Hallelujah! White Lake. White Lake area, and this is our first encounter with the desert oaks. They're one of my favorite trees. And of course, just after I say that, the desert oaks disappear. Oh, there's a big sucker up there.
There's a few around.
I love the way the wind whistles through the needles, and it just reminds me of the desert.
They're lovely to camp near.
They really are. Yeah, that one's got some pine cones or some nuts on it, doesn't it? Cool. Go, guy, go. Reproduce. Make more. Have a look at this. A stand of desert oak. in between the swales of a dune. If you can ever camp underneath one of these suckers, I would highly recommend it. Got all its needles on the ground. Flick the microphone around and we'll see whether we can hear the wind whistling through the needles. Quite a stand of them here. There's hundreds of them. It's another one of those white lakes in front of us. No water, just a little bit of salt. I like how we run right along the shoreline like this. That's pretty neat. Running in along a dune field between White Lake and Lake Aerodrome. And from the map, Lake Aerodrome looks pretty specky. Still got these awesome desert oaks all along the track. Wonder how many fires these guys have been through. This is the hallelujah moment. Just over the top of this sand dune is Lake Aerodrome. Well, let's check it out. We're only 5 kilometers away from well number 12. That one's got fully functioning well, good water, and we're going to pull up there and recommission our water supplies, which, to be honest, we don't need to. We've got, I'd guess at the moment, well over 100 liters of water on board. But the opportunity is there, so we'll take it.
Camel nests.
2 camel nests with poo.
Here on the edge of Lake Aerodrome, we've got camel poo and what our friend Scott Green called camel nests, where they've laid down for the night.
Lake Aerodrome. It's only about 50 meters behind us, and we are 3.5 kilometers from well number 12. We're well and truly in the sandy desert now with the dunes and the desert oaks and the little scrubby scrubs. That was probably the largest dune that we've hit so far. Starting to get into some biggies. There is well number 12, fully restored and ready for us to recommission our water. Give the animals a drink.
That's as full as you'll get it. You just have to let it sink.
This was refurbished 20 years ago, and it's still in pretty good nick. The copper's logs are starting to get a little bit crusty, but with the well nestled in and amongst desert oaks. Gotta love that. We've just pulled up at well 12 to have our lunch. We've recommissioned with water already. This would be a lovely little camp area. You got the desert oaks and the whistling through the needles of the desert oak, yes. And it really is just serene. One thing that might scare the shit out of you, though, it did us, is these fuel drums. When they're in the sun, they pop and they carry on and make a noise. It's frightening. There's a little sign here. Siphon 10 liters with short bit of 6mm fuel hose. Took a while, but it will help the fuel anxiety greatly. And my KTMs love the high octane. It's probably got about a quarter of a tank in there. That one's empty. That one's about a quarter full. And that one's empty. And there you go. Very interesting. We won't need fuel. We've got plenty on board. But if you got into desperation at well 12, that's pretty piss poor management. Certainly from a car perspective. We had crackers, cream cheese, a little bit of hot salami. It was delicious. Well, the corrugations at the moment are shit. They're the worst we've seen so far on the track. It surprises me. I wasn't expecting to have corrugations quite this bad out here, but this would be as bad as any dirt road that we've been on. Certainly as bad as any of the corrugations in the Simpson Desert. We just passed an exhaust pipe back there from somebody's car who's corrugated off. As soon as you go around a corner where you have to back off on the power, corrugations disappear. As soon as you get on the straight where everybody gets back on the power, corrugations are back again.
Oh, and then rocks again.
Yes, we do have sand interspersed with rock. We're only a few hundred meters from the turnoff for well 13, which is about 2 kilometers off the track. And we happen across this rover. Oh, Landy, eh? She has seen better days. I don't think it'll buff out, but maybe with somebody a bit more skillful than myself, might get it. And she was a 6-cylinder petrol. 75 years of Land Rover, Trans-Australian Expedition. Good on ya, boys. We have made it into well 13, and this is all that remains. There's the truck over there in the background. A depression, a bucket, and what's left of the trough. 13 is not a lucky number for this particular well. She's fully collapsed, caved in on itself, and it's about 2 kilometers off of the track to get in here. So even the track has abandoned this well. We're west of well 14 at the moment, going through a forest of these red berry bushes. We've seen them before. I can't quite remember where. It might have been the Kennedy Ranges actually, but certainly not in a profuse blooming situation as they are here at the moment. They do like to encroach upon the track, these red berry bushes as well.
You wouldn't even notice them if they weren't, you know,
in bloom.
Yeah.
They're like bunches of grapes almost.
Yeah, there's one that's not in bloom, and it's, you know, you can see the dark seed pods, but it doesn't draw your eye like that red does.
No.
We've seen lots of these trees with the red berries and then black seed pods, and they have the holly sort of type leaf. Very, very pretty.
We are at well number 14. Believe it or not, there's a well in here somewhere. There's the trough through the scrub, and there is the well completely collapsed and filled in. Well number 13 has a twin sister, and that is well number 14. I wouldn't have expected twins in the desert, but there you go. Good morning, campers. We are on day number 6 on the canning. We were pulled up at the side of the track for camp last night in a very nondescript area, not too dissimilar from what you see in front of you now. We're on our way to well number 15. We've got about another, I guess, 16 kilometers maybe to get us there. Still, so far we have only seen 3 parties on this trip. 2 are going in our direction, and one party was going opposite us. We fire up Starlink every evening, and I can see on the Canning Facebook page that there's lots of people setting out, but because the Canning is so bloody long, you could have 100 cars out here, and depending on the timing, you might never see them.
If you stay the same distance apart or anything.
Yeah, exactly. I mentioned about motorbikes earlier. I can remember my very first bike Dad bought for $50 off the neighbors. It was a Honda Z50, you know, those little bikes with the big balloon tires. Had an automatic transmission, a 3-speed automatic, 3 down. And we used to zoom all over the neighborhood in that little bike. We loved it. Once I grew out of that bike, I graduated to a YZ80, Yamaha YZ80. It was a 1974 model. The early ones with the gray tank and the red stripe down the tank. I think we bought that bike off of a friend of Dad's for $275. And it never gave me any trouble. I had that for a couple of years. I think the clutch burnt out on it once, and I just opened up the side case and scuffed the clutch plates up on the concrete, popped them back in, and they were good to go. I sold that bike to a neighbor, probably for similar to what I bought the thing for, and I bought another YZ80, a little later model. I think it was about a 78 model, and that was a yellow one. That's when Yamaha went to the yellow bikes. Had that one for a couple of years, and then I sold that and bought my CR125, and that was the last bike I had as a kid. We used to zoom around the neighborhood. Not too far from our place was a motocross track called the Erie Ramblers, and I remember we were back in the motocross track. We're not meant to be there, of course. You needed a membership and all the rest of it, but we're back there in the motocross track, my friends and I, zooming around all over the place, thinking we're king of the world. And the authorities, the Erie Rambler authorities, happened to come back there while we were there. We've been back there dozens of times, maybe even hundreds of times, and never got sprung. But we got sprung that time, and they chased us for kilometers down a fence row it was, and we ran like scared little kids. And eventually we got away, but we shot ourselves. And then I had my brush with the law on my motorbike. Again, as all young kids do, you drive these bloody bikes back then on the roads, completely unregistered. We did have all the gear, helmets and everything. But I remember riding to a mate's place, and I was in the Hillman Marsh area. The road basically runs along a berm, and you've got water on either sides of you, and a cop car came from the opposite direction. And there was absolutely nowhere that I could run. So he blocked the road, and he got me, and he impounded my bike. And I got a ride home in the police car and met my dad at the front door with Mr. Policeman. Dad was not a happy camper. I wasn't a happy camper because the bugger caught me in the friggin' middle of a friggin' marsh. What are the chances? If I was at an open field or something like that, I could have got away, but I was trapped like a rat.
Well, as if your dad didn't know you were riding over to your friend's place on your bike, though, so he must have just been mad you got caught.
I think he was annoyed we got caught, because it inconvenienced him, because he had to go get our bike out of the impound lot.
Exactly, because I'm thinking, like, your dad knew what you were doing on your bikes, for the most part.
I can't remember what the fine was, but you had to pay a fine to get your bike out of the impound. And of course there was a fine for riding unregistered. Actually, you know what? I don't think he booked me on that behalf. I think he just took my bike away. That was probably in my mid-teens, I guess, and that was pretty much the end of my teenage riding career. University and other friends and different circles of different spheres of friends, I guess, that weren't into bikes. Whatever the reason, anyway, I got out of bikes there for a while. I did also have a road bike, so believe it or not, I eventually got my bike license, and I needed that to ride my road bike. I bought that off a good mate, Richard Icabelli, and that was a Kawasaki 454 LTD. Looked like a mini Harley Davidson. And its big claim to fame was its engine was about a half a Ninja engine, and it got along pretty cool. It was a good bike. I liked it. Belt drive, water cooled, and I had that through my university days and sold that at the end of university. So I probably had that for 4 years. I remember going over to Richard's one day, the guy who I bought the bike from, and he had this, what was it, a Bouvier, this big ass shaggy dog, and it was mean. And I drove into the driveway, and I don't know whether he didn't like bikes or he recognized the bike and thought I was stealing it or whatever, but he came over and he bit me a big one right on the calf, back of my leg. And holy shit, did that hurt. Teeth sunk right into the muscle and everything. No stitches or anything, but it hurt like hell. I sold that to buy my first car. I'm not counting the Pontiac Parisienne that I mentioned earlier, and I'm not counting the Henry J. You'll hear about the Henry J a little bit later on, but my first real car, in quotation marks, that was registered was a 1986 Monte Carlo SS, and I love that car. I'd still have another one of those if they were freely available here in Australia, but we'll save the Monte SS stories for another day. Yeah, then it was a long time before my next bike, which was the WR450 that I've got at the moment. And Matt, who you've seen on a lot of the Jafffa videos, was I guess was the catalyst to me buying that bike, because he bought his WR250.
Thanks, Matt.
about a year before mine, before I bought the 450. But he bought his 250 and he was zooming around and having a blast, and I was like, oh man, that looks like a lot of fun again. So I bought mine in 2008. He bought his in 07, I bought mine in 08. And the difference between bikes, between when I was a kid and that bike, were like night and day. So much more supple suspension, so much more power. It was just, it's night and day between the old bikes and the new bikes and the technology. And I still got that bike today. If you haven't seen the last video we did on bikes, it was a year ago now in the Simpson Desert. Jill and the girls were behind the wheel of the cars.
Yeah, Kim and I.
Yeah, and the boys were on the bikes, and we did a double crossing of the Simo, which was a blast. That video's awesome too. Check that one out. Coming up to a little parking area at the top of Hart's Hill, and we're going to have a look around here. This is the only hill you can see for absolute miles. Is that frickin' toilet paper?
It sure is.
Bloody pigs. Jill's up on the top of Hart Hill, or Hart's Hill.
Yeah.
And there's a little cave here, which is very neat. And I'll climb up this hill with my inappropriate footwear, yes. And this is it. We're on the only elevated bit for very long distance.
Yes.
You won't be able to hear it on the microphone, but the wind is whistling through the needles of all of those trees. It's very soothing. That's what I like about the canning. It throws little surprises like this at you. You know, you're driving along this flat country. We've been in corrugations and dead flat for, I don't know, 50 kilometers plus. And then, boom, out of nowhere, Hart's Hill. After traveling a good 10 or 20 kilometers on very corrugated sandy tracks, we are approaching well 15, a couple hundred meters in front of us. It is called Manena, and apparently I read on one of these information plaques that the wells were renamed to native names for a couple of reasons. One, to help them identify the wells, and two, to stop the sabotaging, because the locals were sabotaging the wells. We are at well number 15, and this is another one of those fully restored wells. I grabbed the bucket and put a little bit of water in the trough for the birds and the wildlife. It's the first one that I've seen earthen sides to it. Most of them have the timber slats, which you can see here, but then down a little bit further you've got some earthen sides. So well 15 is different from the rest in that respect. So far in terms of water, you've got well 6, 12, and now 15 where you can get some decent water. go. We're in the desert proper now. We've got sand dunes, but if you compare it to the Simpson Desert, the corrugations out here are absolutely vicious. I know there's corrugations in the Simo, but the sand dunes are a lot closer together, so you get respite. Out here, the sand dunes are 2, 3, 4 kilometers apart from one another, and you're on massively corrugated, vicious little tracks in between each of the dunes. And there is no respite. You know, you can kind of grab the edge up, get up about maybe 50 millimeters on the edge, try to get a little bit of sand to fill in the corrugation in front of you, but even that doesn't help.
And you're afraid of getting the tire spiked.
It's always the danger of running on the edge. The dunes themselves, so far anyway, are a lot smaller than the ones in the Simo. Here's a typical dune here, and they tend to be double humpers as well. We'll see whether this one is the case. Yep, it's a double humper, but it's a big double humper. But you see, there's corrugations already, even in the short little distance between this one ridge of the dune and the next ridge. And as soon as you get off the hill, bam, corrugations again. It makes for tiring driving. You got to get out regularly and have a stretch and get the cobwebs out of your brain. Well, after 500 kilometers of hammering, the lower control arms are still holding up, as are all the bushes. Go genuine. Another thing cool about the desert out here is you've actually got some trees, some proper sized trees on the dunes. There's a good example of a double humper. Here's an interesting little artifact out here in the middle of the desert. This is Murray Rankin's trolley. I don't know whether you know the story of this, but back in '74, he, a Kiwi, and 2 fellas from England decided they were going to walk across the desert. The boys from England, that trolley broke down at well 9, and Murray's, it broke down here just past well 15. I betcha he did not know that he would continue to be famous 50 years after he tried to do this back in '74. I wonder what let go. Maybe the handle sheared off? That'd be a game changer. If your handle broke, you'd be not towing. She's been through a couple of fires, given the fact that there's not a skerrick of rubber left on it. Very cool. Good on them for having a go. And check this out. Grevilleas are just starting to come out in flower. Nice one. This is a decent little dune here. Oh, a double humper into the dip. And up and out. I love those. I love them.
So much camel poo. The camels have come up and over that dune I just filmed Terry on, and then there's a regular trail, I'd say they go off into the distance.
Well, that looks suspiciously like the side step off a Land Cruiser to me. We've just come through that rocky section. I don't see it branded Toyota anywhere, but definitely a side step, and she definitely got crunched on that rock. It's kind of neat. We're driving down the middle of a sandy riverbed.
Just after the sand dune and then the rocks. It's been very changeable.
It has. It's nice now. Changing up a little bit. We were in that very flat country for a very long time.
With all the corrugations.
Yes, gum trees in bloom.
That's neat. So smooth.
It is. It's beautiful after those corrugations.
And rocks.
And rocks, yes. I think we're coming out of the riverbed, or maybe we're already out of it. It's like we're going into the cup of a dune. Yeah, there's a valley right in the middle, and we're going through it. Don't you start corrugations. Well, there we have it, folks. Well number 16. Let's go down here. Try not to collapse the sides in and drown or fall to our death. No, it only drops down about 5 feet, and it's full of silt. It's interesting how the sides have collapsed in like that. Nothing much left of the well itself, but the trough stands out like the proverbial. Not in the best nick anymore, but you can see the full length of it.